Jack Harper sat in the corner of the military transport ship, gripping the strap of his pack. The hum of the engines was steady, but the crew's voices carried a tense edge. The ship was flying through a dangerous meteor field, each rock streaking past like a blur of steel. The pilot called out warnings while the rest of the crew braced for impact. Jack's mission was simple in words but heavy in weight. He had to deliver vital intel to the capital. It was not just any intel. It was a set of coordinates and codes that could protect Queen Alexandra from a coup brewing inside her own court. If these codes were delayed, the Queen's loyal forces could fall, and the country would be thrown into chaos. The ship shuddered violently as a meteor clipped the side. Alarms wailed and the lights flickered. Jack was thrown against the bulkhead. He forced himself back into the seat and held on. The captain's voice came through the intercom, strained but controlled. They were going to take heavy damage. A sudden crash ripped through the ship as another meteor struck. The hull groaned, metal tearing under the force. Panels fell from the ceiling. Jack heard screams from the crew bay. Smoke filled the air. The transport dropped into a steep dive. Jack's head slammed against the wall, and pain exploded behind his eyes. He tasted blood and felt the warm sting of a deep cut along his temple. He tried to stand, but his right leg buckled under him. The ship twisted, forcing him back down. The smell of burning fuel filled the cabin. Through the chaos, he heard someone yelling for all surviving crew to head for the escape pods. A young officer ran up to Jack, eyes wide. She told him to get to safety, but he shook his head. The intel had to reach the capital. There was no time to send another messenger. He could not trust anyone else to see it through. A flashback burned in his mind. Months ago, Queen Alexandra had stood in the Great Hall, her voice strong as she promised justice for the people. She had spared Jack's family from punishment during the last rebellion, even though the council had pushed for harsh action. That mercy had bound him to her cause. He would not let her be taken down by traitors. The ship jolted again, and the officer grabbed Jack's arm, trying to drag him to the pods, tore himself free, and made for the small cargo bay. His plan was simple. Grab the emergency drop pod and take it down alone. It was dangerous, but it would put him closer to the capital's borders. Flames lit the corridor as he staggered through it. Each step sent waves of pain through his side. His vision blurred, but he forced himself forward. In the bay, he sealed the intel in a secure case and strapped it to his chest. Another explosion rocked the ship, and the walls split open, revealing the black void of space. Jack threw himself into the drop pod and slammed the hatch shut. His hands shook as he pressed the launch control. The pod released from the transport just as the ship broke apart in a burst of fire and debris. The blast rattled the pod, sending it spinning. Inside, Jack fought to keep his breathing steady. The pod's systems reported critical descent toward a war-torn region far from the capital. He did not care. Every second counted. The Queen's safety was worth more than his own life. The descent was rough. The pod slammed through the atmosphere, flames licking the window. Jack gritted his teeth, gripping the seat. The landing was brutal, throwing him forward against the harness. Pain shot through his injured leg, but he refused to cry out. When the hatch opened, smoke and dust filled the air. The battlefield stretched before him, littered with broken machines and scorched earth. He pulled himself out, limping, and looked toward the distant horizon. Somewhere beyond that wasteland stood the capital. He could almost see the palace walls in his mind. The thought of the Queen in danger burned in his chest. Jack took one step, then another. The intel case pressed against him. His body screamed in protest, but his mind was fixed on one thing. No matter what it cost, he would finish the mission. Jack pushed himself forward through the dust and smoke, his leg dragging behind him.
Ow.
Every step made his body ache, but stopping was not an option.
Ow.
The battlefield stretched wide, with craters in the ground, and the sound of distant gunfire echoing through the air. He kept his eyes on the horizon, searching for any sign of cover. A sudden crack of a rifle made him drop low. He crawled toward a burnt-out vehicle and pressed his back against it. He scanned the area, spotting movement to his left. A figure in a faded medic uniform was kneeling beside a wounded soldier. She had short brown hair and a calm but focused look, her hands moving quickly to stop the bleeding. Jack hesitated, then limped toward her. She noticed him and held up a hand, telling him to wait. After securing the wounded man, she walked over. Her eyes moved to the blood on Jack's side, and the limp in his leg. "You're hurt," she said. "You need treatment now." Later, Jack replied, shaking his head. "I have to get to the capital." "You will not make it far like this," she said. "If you keep moving, you might not make it at all." Jack leaned against the wreckage, breathing hard. "There is no time. I have something the Queen must see. If I stop, the mission fails." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "My name is Claire Evans. I know a safe path through this region. If you want to reach the capital alive, you will let me help you." He did not want to slow down, but he knew she was right. Without medical help, his body might give out before he even reached the outer gates. He gave a short nod. Claire quickly checked his wounds. Her hands were steady, even when she saw how deep the cut on his side was. She wrapped it tight, then gave him water. He felt a little stronger, but the pain was still sharp. They began moving together, keeping low and avoiding the open ground. Claire knew the area well, guiding him around patrols and past areas littered with traps. At one point, they found a group of enemy soldiers checking bodies for supplies. Claire pulled Jack behind a wall until the men moved on. As they walked, Jack told her more about the mission. He spoke of the traitors in the Queen's court and how the intel could expose their plan. Claire listened without interrupting, her pace never slowing. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink. The air grew colder, and the sounds of battle faded behind them. Came across a small stream, and Claire insisted they stop for a moment. Jack drank, then tried to push forward again, but Claire blocked his way. "You will not make it if you collapse," she said firmly. "Rest here for a few minutes." Jack wanted to argue, but the weight in his chest and the burning in his leg told him she was right again. He sat on a rock, staring at the horizon. He could almost see the tall walls of the capital in his mind, but they still felt far away. "Why are you helping me?" he asked suddenly. Claire looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because if the Queen falls, the people will suffer. I have seen enough suffering." There was no more to say. They rose again and moved on. Night fell, and the moonlight cast pale shadows on the ruined ground. Claire found an old farmhouse and decided they would stop there for the night. The roof was half gone, but it was enough to shield them from the wind. Jack lay down, the intel case still strapped to his chest. His body ached in every muscle, and the sharp pain in his side made it hard to breathe. Claire sat near the doorway, keeping watch. As his eyes closed, he thought of Queen Alexandra standing in the great hall, her voice strong, her eyes steady. The promise he had made to her came back to him. No matter the cost, he would reach her. Jack drifted into uneasy sleep, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. The morning air was cold and sharp when Jack opened his eyes. He pushed himself up slowly, his muscles stiff from the night on the hard floor. Claire was already awake, checking her small supply of medical gear. She glanced at him and gave a short nod. "We should move before the patrols start sweeping the area," she said. Jack stood, though his leg protested. The pain in his side was worse now, a deep throb with every breath. Still, the weight of the intel case against his chest reminded him there was no turning back. They stepped out into the gray light, the land ahead littered with shattered buildings and burned-out vehicles. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the sound of their boots on gravel. Claire kept them close to walls and rubble, moving with care. They had not gone far before distant gunfire erupted. Jack froze, scanning the streets. Claire pulled him into the shadow of a collapsed building, just as a squad of soldiers appeared from the far side. The enemy moved quickly, searching doorways and corners. Jack gripped his weapon, but Claire put a hand on his arm, shaking her head. They stayed hidden until the soldiers passed, their voices fading into the distance. When it was safe, they moved again. Streets narrowed, turning into an alley filled with broken glass. Jack's steps slowed as his vision swam. The world tilted, and he felt himself stumble. Claire caught him before he hit the ground. "You are burning up," she said, her voice low but urgent. Jack tried to speak, but the words came out weak. The cut on his side was leaking through the bandage. Claire guided him into a half-collapsed shop and lowered him to the floor. She tore open the bandage and began working quickly, cleaning and wrapping the wound again. Jack clenched his teeth against the pain. His hands shook as he tried to push himself up. "We cannot stop," he said. "If you bleed out, the mission ends here," Claire replied firmly. "Give me a moment." He hated the delay, but the haze in his mind told him she was right. He let her work, focusing on the steady movements of her hands. After a few minutes, she tightened the last wrap and sat back. "It will hold for now," she said. "You have to slow down." Jack stood again, leaning on the counter for support. They left the shop and pressed on, skirting the edges of a wide square where smoke still rose from a recent battle. They found a narrow side street that cut toward the hills beyond the town. The path through the hills was rough, with rocks and loose soil that made Jack's limp worse. Each step felt heavier, but the thought of the capital kept him moving. Claire stayed close, ready to steady him when he stumbled. As the day dragged on, they stopped in the shadow of a large boulder to drink from a canteen. Jack leaned back, letting the cold stone cool his fevered skin. "Why do you trust me with this?" Claire asked suddenly. Jack looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "'Cause you chose to stay and help when you could have walked away. That is all the proof I need." Claire gave a small nod and they continued in silence. The hills gave way to a stretch of open ground. It was dangerous to cross, but there was no other way forward. They moved quickly, keeping low. Halfway across, a burst of gunfire tore into the ground near them. Jack dropped, dragging Claire down with him. They crawled toward a ditch, bullets snapping overhead. Jack raised his weapon and fired back, forcing the shooters to take cover. Claire pointed toward a line of abandoned trucks near the far edge of the field. Together they crawled and ran in bursts, reaching the rusted vehicles. Jack's breathing was ragged, but he pushed through the pain. They found a gap between two trucks and slipped through, finally leaving the open ground behind. The cover of trees greeted them, and Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. As night fell, they found another abandoned building to shelter in. Jack sat against the wall, the intel case still in his hands. Claire lit a small fire in a metal can to keep them warm. Jack stared into the flames, his mind drifting to the memory of the Queen's promise and the faces of those who depended on him. His body was weak, but his resolve was unbroken. He would reach the capital, no matter the cost. Dawn broke with a pale light as Jack and Claire moved from the ruined building into the trees. The air was damp, and the ground was soft under their boots. Birds scattered as they passed, the only signs of life in the quiet forest. Jack's leg felt heavier with each step, but the sight of distant smoke over the capital kept him going. They reached the edge of the forest by mid-morning. The land beyond was a mix of open fields and scattered ruins. The capital walls stood far away, their tall shape barely visible through the haze. But something was wrong. The sounds of fighting were already drifting from that direction. Claire crouched beside a fallen wall and looked through a small gap. "Enemy forces are already inside the outer districts," she said. Jack's jaw tightened. "Then we are late, but not too late." They began moving quickly, keeping low as they crossed broken streets and alleys. The smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air. They passed civilians hiding in doorways, their faces pale and frightened. Jack ignored the pull to stop and help. The mission came first. Ahead, a barricade of sandbags and metal blocked the road. Enemy soldiers stood guard, scanning the streets. Jack pointed to a narrow path between two collapsed houses. They slipped through, avoiding the checkpoint. The closer they got to the palace, the more dangerous the streets became. Small skirmishes broke out around them, gunfire echoing off stone walls. At one corner, Claire pulled Jack into cover as a group of armed men marched past. They carried flags of the traitor faction, their boots striking in unison. They found a narrow sewer access hidden behind rubble. Claire lifted the rusted grate, and Jack lowered himself inside. The air was damp and foul, but the tunnel led straight toward the palace district. Halfway through, they heard footsteps ahead. Two enemy scouts were coming their way. Jack pressed himself against the wall, waiting until they were close, then struck quickly. The fight was brief but brutal, leaving the scouts silent on the tunnel floor. Claire said nothing, only nodded for them to move on. The tunnel ended in a drainage outlet near the palace gardens. Jack climbed out, his body aching from the effort. The palace gates were just ahead, but enemy soldiers patrolled the grounds. Claire looked around and spotted a service door on the side of the wall. "I can draw them away," she whispered. "Get to the gates." Jack shook his head. "Too risky. If you try to cross alone, they will see you," she said. "Us. This is the only way." Before he could argue, Claire slipped away, keeping low. Moments later, a sharp noise rang out from the far side of the gardens. The soldiers turned and ran toward it. Jack knew she had given him the chance. He limped across the open ground, his breath ragged. The gates loomed ahead. His vision blurred, but he could see palace guards on the other side. They were holding the line against attackers. Jack reached the gates just as his strength began to fail, called out, his voice hoarse. One of the guards turned, eyes widening in recognition. "Open the gate," the guard shouted. "He has the message." They pulled him through, and Jack fell to his knees. His hands trembled as he unstrapped the intel case from his chest. He held it out to the captain of the guard, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "For the Queen." It must reach her now. Without waiting for a response, Jack's vision went black, and he collapsed on the stone floor. The captain shouted for medics as the case was rushed toward the palace. Jack lay still, his breathing shallow, but the mission was now in the hands of those who could finish it. Outside the gates, the battle still raged, but the most important part of the fight had just reached the Queen's walls. The sound of battle outside the palace gates echoed through the marble halls. Queen Alexandra stood in the war chamber, her advisors tense around the map table. The moment the sealed intel case was brought in, the room went silent. She broke the seal and pulled out the documents. Her eyes scanned the codes and locations, and her expression hardened. This was the proof she had been waiting for. It revealed the exact positions of the traitor forces, their supply lines, and the hidden network inside the capital. "Signal the loyal regiments," she ordered. "Cut off every escape route. They will not leave these walls alive." Messengers ran to carry out her command. The Queen turned to the captain of the guard. "Where is the courier who brought this?" "In the infirmary, Your Majesty," he replied. He was barely standing when he arrived. She paused for a moment, then left the chamber, striding quickly through the corridors. In the royal infirmary, Jack lay on a narrow bed, pale and still. Claire sat beside him, her uniform torn and dusty, her eyes fixed on his face. The Queen approached quietly. Claire rose and bowed her head. "Would not stop," she said. "Carried it all the way here." Jack stirred at the sound of their voices. His eyes opened slowly, and he saw the Queen standing there. He tried to sit up, but she raised a hand. "Rest, Jack," she said. "You have done more than anyone could ask. Is it... enough?" He asked, his voice weak. "More than enough," she replied. "'Cause of you, we will win this day." Outside, the sound of gunfire grew louder, then began to fade. The Queen's forces moved with precision, cutting down the traitors' lines and sealing off their retreat. Loyal troops reclaimed the outer districts, pushing the enemy toward the river. By midday, the last pockets of resistance were surrounded. The Queen herself rode out to oversee the final surrender. Word of Jack's mission spread quickly among the soldiers. They spoke of the man who had crossed a battlefield, wounded and outnumbered, to deliver the truth. In the infirmary, Jack watched the light change through the tall windows. Claire stayed near, making sure he drank water and changed his bandages. He asked her what was happening, and she told him the fighting was almost over. When the Queen returned, the city was safe again. She came straight to the infirmary, still wearing her armor. She looked at Jack with a faint smile. "The capital stands because of you," she said. "History will remember your courage." Jack shook his head. "Capital stands because of all who fought. Just did my part." "Your part was the key," she said firmly, "and it will not be forgotten." She placed a medal in his hand, the highest honor of the realm. Jack looked at it for a moment, then set it on the table beside the bed. "I did not come for a medal," he said. "I came because I owed you a promise." The Queen nodded, understanding. "And you have kept it." Weeks later, when the fires were out and the walls repaired, Jack walked slowly through the palace courtyard. His injuries still pained him, but he could move without help now. Soldiers saluted him as he passed, and he returned the gesture with a quiet nod. Claire joined him, her own uniform cleaned and repaired. "You could stay here," she said. "The Queen would give you a place." Jack looked toward the city beyond the gates. "I think I will keep moving. There will always be another fight that matters." "Then I will see you again," Claire said. He smiled faintly. "I'll count on it." Jack left the palace that day, walking toward the horizon. The capital was safe, the Queen still on her throne, and the people free. He carried no medal, no banner, Only the knowledge that when the mission mattered most, he had finished it. The memory of that day would live on, told in the streets and in the barracks. A story of a man who faced grave trauma, but would not turn back until his duty was done.